The year is 2003. The place is the Polk County Extension Office. A young agent named Mark sits under a fluorescent light. The light hums a low, tired note. He is compiling the annual yield reports, a sea of numbers: corn, soybeans, wheat, bushels per acre, acre after acre. He enters the data into a spreadsheet. The numbers are predictable. 45 bushels an acre here, 52 there. A good year for some, a tough one for others. Then he sees a name: Jenkins, Sarah. He looks at the number next to her name: soybeans, 112.3 bushels per acre. He stops. He reads it again: 112. It has to be a mistake, a typo. The county average is 48. The state record is somewhere in the low 90s. 112 is not a number. It is a fiction. He picks up the phone. He calls the grain co-op, gets Bill on the line. "Bill, I'm looking at the Jenkins report. There's a typo on her soybean yield." The line is quiet for a moment. Then Bill laughs, a dry, knowing sound. "Son," he says, "there's no typo. That's Sarah. That's what she does." Mark hangs up the phone. He feels a strange chill. He pulls the physical file for the Jenkins farm. It's thick, decades of paper. He opens it. On the top sheet, under farm name, it's not a corporate entity. It just says Jenkins Home Place. Under operator, one name: Sarah Jenkins. No partners, no co-signers, no husband. He digs deeper into the file. He finds an old newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle, dated March 1973, a photograph of the high school's Future Farmers of America chapter, a dozen boys in blue corduroy jackets, and one girl, Sarah. The headline reads, "Local girl earns state farmer degree." He smiles. Then he sees it, tucked behind the clipping, a carbon copy of a student evaluation form from that same year, written in neat, firm cursive. The signature at the bottom is clear: Mr. David Henderson, ag teacher. The evaluation is full of praise. Excellent student. Top of her class in agronomy. A keen mind for the work. Then, at the bottom, a handwritten note in the comments section. Mark leans closer to read it. A fine student, a good heart, but she will never make it on her own. Farming is a man's work. It requires a strength she does not possess. I am afraid she will lose her father's land. She will need a good husband to run that place. Mark leans back in his chair. The fluorescent light hums. He looks at the note from 1973. He looks at the yield report from 2003. A 30-year gap. A lifetime of work. Between what a good man was certain she couldn't do and what the numbers proved she had already done. This is a story about those 30 years. It's a story about the quietest revolutions, the ones that happen with dirt under the fingernails, not with speeches in front of crowds. This channel tells the stories of the people who were counted out, the ones who were told they couldn't, the ones who proved, through decades of labor, that they could. If you believe these stories matter, if you believe they need to be told, subscribe to this channel. Because the story of Sarah Jenkins is the story of so many others, and we are going to tell them all. Let's go back to 1972. Sarah is 17 years old. Her hands are already the hands of a farmer, calloused and capable. Her father is sick, a sickness in his lungs from the dust of 1,000 harvests. He sits in a chair by the window, watching the fields he can no longer walk. The farm is 160 acres, paid for, but old. The equipment is old. The methods are old. Sarah knows this. She sees the future coming, and she has a plan. It is her senior FFA project, a 5-year plan to modernize the Jenkins home place. She stands in front of her ag teacher, Mr. Henderson. The classroom smells of sawdust and damp soil. Mr. Henderson is a good man. Everyone in the county knows it. He coached Little League for 20 years. He's a deacon at the First Baptist Church. He has kind eyes and a firm handshake. He listens to Sarah's presentation. He nods patiently. He looks at her plan. It's detailed. It's smart. A transition to a different crop rotation, corn and soybeans. A focus on soil conservation to stop the erosion on the back 40. And a small loan, a $5,000 loan from the farmer's bank for a newer 6-row planter to replace their ancient 4-row model. She finishes her presentation. The room is quiet. Mr. Henderson takes off his glasses. He cleans them with his handkerchief. He looks at Sarah, and he has that look in his eyes, the look of a kind man about to deliver a hard truth. "Sarah," he says, "this is an excellent plan, one of the best I've ever seen from a student. Your research is impeccable. But," the word hangs in the air. He slides the plan back across the desk. "I cannot in good conscience sign off on this. I cannot recommend you for this loan." Sarah feels the floor drop out from under her. "Why?" He sighs, a deep, weary sound. "Because this plan is based on a flawed premise. It assumes you will be doing this work alone. And farming, real farming, is not a one-person job. It is certainly not a one-woman job." He leans forward. His voice is gentle. He is trying to protect her. "Do you know what it's like to fix a broken axle in a field in February? When the wind is blowing and the metal is frozen to your hands? Have you ever tried to pull a calf at 2 in the morning by yourself? Have you ever had to wrestle a 200-pound seed bag? This isn't about books, Sarah. This is about brute force. It's about endurance. It's about having a partner, a husband. Your father is a good man, but he is not well. He will not be out there with you. The bank will see this plan, they will see your name, and they will see a risk. A risk I am not willing to put my name on. It would be irresponsible. It would be setting you up to fail." Sarah just stares at him. Her heart is pounding, but her face is a mask of calm. "So what do I do?" Mr. Henderson smiles, a sad, fatherly smile. "You're a smart girl, Sarah. You have a good piece of land. The best thing you can do for that farm is to find a good, hard-working young man to marry. Combine your land with his. Build a family. Build a future. That is how you will keep this farm. That is your path." He believed it, every word. He wasn't being cruel. He wasn't being malicious. He was being certain. Certain about her limits. Certain about her future. And that certainty, delivered with such kindness, was more devastating than any anger could ever be. Sarah walked home that day. The loan application sat on the kitchen table, unsigned, useless. Her father was in his chair, watching the sun set over the west field. She told him what Mr. Henderson said. She told him every word. She expected anger. She expected him to rail against the injustice. He did not. He just sat there, nodding slowly. He was quiet for a long time. The room filled with the sound of the ticking clock on the wall. Finally, he turned his head from the window. He looked at his daughter. His eyes were clear. "The land doesn't care who works it, Sarah." He said the words slowly, like he was placing each one carefully in her hands. "It only cares how it's worked. They can keep their loan. They can keep their opinions. They took the money. They didn't take the dirt. The dirt is enough. He passed away that winter. The snow fell thick and heavy on his fields, and Sarah was alone. Spring came, a cold, wet spring. The neighbors were getting their fields ready. The sound of their big tractors filled the air. Sarah stood in her machine shed. The $5,000 loan was a ghost. The new planter was a dream. She had her father's John Deere 4020, a good tractor, but old. And she had the planter, a John Deere 71, 4 rows, from the 1960s. It was worn out. The seed boxes were cracked. The press wheels were wobbling. She had no money for fertilizer, no money for herbicides. By every conventional measure, she was finished. Mr. Henderson's prediction was coming true. But she had her father's words. The dirt is enough. And she had a mind that Mr. Henderson himself had called brilliant. She couldn't afford the modern way, so she had to invent her own. She spent her nights in the high school library, reading old agronomy journals, university extension bulletins. She found a radical idea, something few farmers in her county had ever heard of: no-till farming, planting directly into the stubble of the previous year's crop. It saved fuel, it saved time, it prevented erosion, but it required a special kind of planter, a planter she could not afford to buy. So she decided to build one. She spent that spring in the machine shed. It became her laboratory, her sanctuary. She learned to weld from an old book. The sparks flew in the dark. She burned her hands. She cried from frustration. She kept going. She drove her pickup truck to the scrapyard. She scavenged for parts. An old, heavy coulter from a discarded chisel plow to cut through the trash. Press wheels from a different machine. She bolted them on. She welded brackets. She reinforced the frame. The result was ugly. A Frankenstein's monster of a machine. Nothing matched. The paint was a patchwork of green and red and rust, but it was hers. She couldn't afford nitrogen fertilizer, the biggest expense for any corn farmer, so she found another way. She bought a bag of clover seed. It was cheap. She planted it in the fall. A thick green carpet covered her fields all winter. The neighbors watched her. They talked at the coffee shop. That Jenkins girl, she's lost her mind. Planting weeds, using that contraption. She's going to lose her daddy's farm before the year is out. The community had split. They weren't cruel. They were just certain. Like Mr. Henderson. Certain they knew how farming worked. Certain she was doing it wrong. That first year was brutal. The spring was wet. The ugly planter struggled in the mud. Her corn came up patchy. The weeds were a constant battle. She spent hundreds of hours walking the fields, pulling thistle and pigweed by hand. Her back ached. Her hands bled. At harvest time, her yield was low, 20 bushels below the county average. By that measure, she had failed. But Sarah wasn't measuring by that measure. She was measuring by a different kind of math, contrast math. Her neighbors had high yields, but they also had high costs: fuel, fertilizer, herbicides, loan payments on new equipment. Sarah had almost no costs. No fertilizer bill, minimal fuel, no loan payment. When the books were settled, her neighbors cleared maybe $50 an acre. Sarah cleared $75. She made a profit, a small one, $4,215. It felt like $1 million. She didn't spend it on a new dress or a vacation. She took every dollar back to the machine shed. She bought a better welder. She bought new steel. She rebuilt the planter, stronger this time, more precise. The next year, she did it again. Clover in the fall, corn in the spring. But this time, the soil was different. The clover had done its work. The earthworms had returned. The ground was softer. It held the moisture. Her yield that year was right at the county average. But her costs were still almost zero. Her profit was 5 times what her neighbors made. The talk at the co-op started to change. The men would stop talking when she walked in. Some still looked at her with suspicion, but others looked at her with a new kind of respect, a grudging admiration. One day, an old farmer named George Peters stopped by, the ally. He had farmed the section next to her family for 50 years. He had watched her grow up. He stood by her fence line, looking at her fields. They were clean. The corn was tall and dark green. He pushed his hat back on his head. "Your daddy would be proud, Sarah." He said it so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Then he cleared his throat. "My planter broke down. The main gearbox is shot. Parts won't be in for a week." He paused. "I was wondering if I could maybe borrow that thing you built." It was more than a request for equipment. It was an admission, an acceptance, a sign that the tide was turning. She just nodded. "Of course, George. Let me show you how it works." Have you ever had to build your own solution because the standard one was denied to you? Have you ever had to prove your worth, not with words, but with welds and sweat and results? It is the loneliest kind of work. There are no cheering crowds. There is only the task in front of you and the quiet satisfaction of seeing it done. Tell me your story in the comments below, because this is where Sarah's story gets bigger. This is where she stops surviving and starts building an empire, one ugly machine at a time. Let me tell you about the next 30 years. The years began to stack up, like layers of soil, each one building on the last. 1975, the year of the expansion. A 40-acre parcel bordering her farm came up for sale. The owner was retiring, moving to town. He wanted $600 an acre, a fair price. Sarah went to the bank, not for a loan. She walked into the president's office. She put a cashier's check on his desk for the full amount, $24,000, cash. The banker just stared at it. He remembered the girl whose loan he had denied just a few years earlier. He didn't say a word. He just stamped the paperwork. She built a second planter that winter, a 6-row version this time. Still ugly, still homemade. But it worked. 1978. Her yields were now consistently 10% above the county average. But because her inputs were so low, her profits were 50% higher. The math was undeniable. Mr. Henderson, her old ag teacher, would drive past her farm on his way to school each morning. He saw the fields, the dark, healthy crops, the straight rows. He saw her old John Deere 4020 still running, pulling a strange-looking machine behind it. He never stopped. He just watched from a distance, the quiet witness. He felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't regret, not yet. It was confusion, a crack in his certainty. 1981, a brutal drought hit the county. The sky was a merciless blue for weeks. The corn in the neighbors' fields turned yellow, then brown. The plowed earth was dry and cracked like old pottery. But Sarah's fields stayed green. The years of no-till and cover crops had created a sponge. The soil was rich with organic matter. It held the water. While others watched their crops wither, hers grew. That fall, a neighbor to the north went bankrupt. The drought was the final straw. The farm was put up for auction on the courthouse steps, 120 acres. Sarah was there. She stood at the back of the crowd. She didn't say a word until the bidding was almost over. She made one bid. $114,000, $950 an acre. The auctioneer banged his gavel. Sold. She paid for it in full, cash. She now farmed 320 acres, alone. 1985, the year she finally retired the old 4020. She drove to the John Deere dealership. The owner was the son of the man who had owned it in the 70s. She didn't look at the used equipment. She walked right up to the biggest tractor on the lot, a brand new John Deere 4450, 140 horsepower, an air-conditioned cab, a radio. It was a palace on wheels. She wrote a check for the full amount, cash. The dealer just shook her hand. He looked her right in the eye. "Congratulations, Sarah. You earned this." 1990. She was farming 800 acres, all of it in a single, contiguous block. She was buying land from the children of the men who had laughed at her. They were retiring. Their kids didn't want the farm, but Sarah did. She was no longer just a farmer. She was a force of nature. University researchers started visiting. Soil scientists, agronomists. They took soil samples. They studied her methods. They wrote papers about what they called the Jenkins system. They marveled at the health of her land, the earthworm population, the water infiltration rates. She was a pioneer, a decade ahead of her time. She just called it farming. 1995, she crossed a threshold. 1,500 acres. She couldn't do it all alone anymore. She hired her first employee, a young man named Tom. He had dropped out of the ag program at the state university. He told her, "I can learn more from you in one season than from 4 years of textbooks." She paid him a good wage. She treated him with respect. He stayed with her for the rest of his career. Mr. Henderson was retired by now. He spent his days reading. He read the State Farm Journal. He saw an article about conservation tillage. It featured a farmer from his home county, Sarah Jenkins. He saw her name on the plat map at the county courthouse, a solid block of green in the center of the county map. The crack in his certainty widened. 2000, the new millennium. Sarah now farmed 2,500 acres. She owned every single acre, free and clear. No debt, no partners, no husband, just the land. And the knowledge that her father had been right all along. The land doesn't care who works it, it only cares how. And that brings us back to 2003, to the yield report. 112.3 bushels per acre, a number that was not supposed to be possible. The local paper decided to do a story. They called it The Queen of Polk County. The young reporter, doing her research, called the retired ag teacher, Mr. David Henderson. She wanted a quote about his former star student. Mr. Henderson agreed, but he had one condition. He wanted to talk to Sarah first. He drove out to her farm. He was an old man now, over 80. He walked with a cane. He pulled into her driveway. The farmstead was immaculate. A new house, a massive machine shed big enough to hold a commercial airplane. Gleaming green and yellow equipment sat in perfect rows. Sarah walked out of the house to meet him. She was in her late 40s. Her face was weathered by the sun and the wind. Her eyes were calm and clear. She looked strong. She looked content. She invited him into the machine shed. The air smelled of diesel and clean steel. He looked around, his mouth slightly open. He had never seen a private farm this well equipped. And then he saw it, mounted on the far wall. Like a piece of sculpture, the original, ugly 4-row planter head she had built in 1973. The physical artifact, a monument to her defiance. He stood in front of it for a long time. He ran a trembling hand over one of the rusty welds. He finally turned to face her. His eyes were wet. "I was wrong, Sarah." His voice was a quiet rasp. "I was so wrong." He said, "I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was being kind. I thought I knew what was best for you." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. The silence in that huge shed was absolute. She didn't say, "It's okay." She didn't say, "Don't worry about it." She gave him the truth. "You were kind, Mr. Henderson." She said it softly, but the words had the weight of 30 years behind them. That's what made it so hard. Anger is a fuel. You can fight a man who hates you. You can use his hate to prove him wrong. But you can't fight a man who is certain he is helping you. You can't fight kindness. You can only outlast it. You can only spend a lifetime proving it wrong. She pointed to the old planter on the wall. "That's what your certainty cost me. It didn't cost me the farm, but it cost me time. It cost me 10 years of struggling with that instead of starting with the right equipment. It cost me a decade of being seen as a fool instead of a farmer." He didn't argue. He didn't make excuses. He just stood there, an old man at the end of his life, facing the consequences of his certainty. He nodded. Tears were now rolling down his weathered cheeks. "I am so sorry," he whispered. Sarah looked at him, the man who had tried to put her in a cage, believing it was a shelter. And for the first time, she felt not anger, not resentment, but a kind of sad peace. "I know," she said. "I know you are." The newspaper article came out. It was a sensation. The reporter, to her credit, told the whole story, including Mr. Henderson's original assessment and his apology. The story was picked up by other papers, farm journals, websites. It went viral in the quiet, slow way that news travels in rural America. Sarah started getting letters, dozens of them, then hundreds. They came from all over the country. They came from women who had been told they couldn't run the family business. They came from young farmers who had been denied loans for unconventional ideas. They came from people who had been hemmed in by the well-meaning certainty of others. They all said the same thing. "Thank you." Sarah realized her story was not just her own. It belonged to them too. She decided to do something. She established a foundation, the Jenkins Foundation for Agricultural Innovation. She funded it herself, with a $1 million donation, cash. The foundation's mission was simple: to give grants to young farmers, especially women, who had a solid plan but couldn't get a traditional bank loan. The first recipient was a young woman from a neighboring state. Her name was Maria. She wanted to start a small, rotational grazing dairy farm, a closed-loop system, sustainable, humane. The loan officer at her local bank had literally laughed in her face. Sarah read her proposal. She saw the same spark she'd had at 17, the same detailed, intelligent plan. She didn't just give Maria a grant, she funded her entire startup. The land, the cows, the equipment. The legacy had begun. The ripples were spreading out. Her farm became a teaching institution. Agronomy students from 2 different universities began visiting every year. They walked her fields. They studied her soil. They learned about the Jenkins system from the woman who invented it. The Jenkins system was now in the textbooks, the same textbooks that were used in Mr. Henderson's old classroom at the high school. The generational echo. Tom, the young man she had hired in 1995, was now her farm manager. He ran the day-to-day operations. She had given him a stake in the business. She was building something that would outlast her. Fast forward to today, 2024. Sarah is in her late 60s. She's not on the farm. She's in Washington, D.C. She's standing in the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. In the agriculture wing, there is a new exhibit. It's a single object, behind a pane of glass, lit by a soft spotlight. It's the original Frankenstein planter head from 1973, rusted, ugly, beautiful. The plaque beside it reads, The Jenkins Planter, an innovation in conservation tillage. Built in 1973 by Sarah Jenkins, this homemade tool launched a revolution in soil health and sustainable farming. It is a testament to the idea that necessity is the mother of invention. A group of school children on a field trip gathers around the exhibit. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, reads the plaque. Her eyes are wide. She turns to her father. "She built that herself?" He nods. "Yes, honey, she did." Sarah overhears them. She is standing at the back of the crowd. Anonymous, unrecognized. A small, quiet smile touches her lips. She doesn't say a word. She just watches. The circle is complete. The most dangerous limitation is the one imposed by someone who genuinely believes they are protecting you. Certainty about another person's capabilities, delivered with kindness, is more damaging than outright hostility. It is a cage with a soft lining. It cannot be fought with anger. It can only be disproven, with decades of work, with quiet determination, with results that speak for themselves. Right now, somewhere in the world, a young person with a brilliant idea is being told it's not possible. They are being told it's for their own good. They are being told to be realistic. They are being handed a map for a smaller life than the one they know they can build. This story is for them. This story is a reminder that the land doesn't care who works it. The canvas doesn't care who paints it. The code doesn't care who writes it. The work only cares how it is done. If this story means something to you, share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their potential is not determined by the opinions of others. Subscribe for more stories of quiet defiance. And in the comments below, tell us about a time you had to prove someone wrong. We read every single one, and we believe you.